Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ontario's 2022 budget has now been released.
The document comes just weeks before the provincial election. The Ford government is promising billions more for highways, hospitals, and transit. And there's good news for seniors and low-income families. Siobhan Morris explains.
The Progressive Conservative budget leans in part on higher revenue from workers earning more, which brings in more income tax, and soaring home prices, bringing in more money from land transfer taxes. The government's using that windfall to help seniors and lower-income Ontarians. A tax credit for low-income families and a seniors tax credit for care at home are new. Eligibility for a lower-income tax credit called LIFT would be expanded for individuals earning about $38,000 to $50,000. The government estimates an extra 700,000 people would benefit, receiving an average of $300 a year, but that number is higher the less you make. And with the tax credit for low to moderate income seniors, seniors can receive up to $1,500 a year to cover things like wheelchairs, walkers and scooters, breathing devices, and certified attendant care. The financial roadmap, called Ontario's Plan to Build, has outlined previously announced plans to build highways, transit, and hospitals. The PCs are earmarking more than $25 billion to plan and build highways over the next decade. Among those projects, the contentious Bradford bypass, linking highways 400 and 404, and construction of Highway 413 through York, Peel, and Halton regions. There's also money to plan for widening the 401 through Pickering and Oshawa, east of Toronto and beyond. And in Niagara region, the province wants to twin the Garden City Skyway, but the government isn't providing a cost for any individual project. The province's financial watchdog has described Ontario's financial picture in fairly rosy terms, but the PCs are planning to run deficits for several years. The projected deficit for next year, just shy of $20 billion. Total spending is forecast to be just short of $200 billion. The PCs anticipate a return to surplus in 2027-2028, 2 years earlier than projected in last year's budget. Spending on education is mostly flat after taking into account money for a childcare plan. The Ontario government's promising better jobs and bigger paychecks and turning to batteries, electric and hybrid vehicle manufacturing to do it. It says it wants to make sure the next generation of vehicles is built in Ontario and sold around the world. The PCs are also pledging to introduce a new provincial park, but where it might be, how much it would cost, they aren't saying. The finance minister was asked several times whether he'd commit to introduce this same budget in the fall if his government is re-elected. He wouldn't give a firm answer. From Queen's Park, Siobhan Morris, CTV News.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu hosted a media conference in Ottawa today to announce that the claims period has opened for the federal safe drinking water settlement. Representatives from Neskantaga First Nation were on hand. The remote community has had a boil water advisory in place for more than 27 years.
Time to act. Enough is enough. Where the most vulnerable are being dictated by somebody else, by policies that don't necessarily work in our communities.
Neskantaga holds the dubious title of having the longest active boil water advisory in Canada. The community's water treatment facility still isn't finished, and the chief and council don't know when the boil water advisory will finally be lifted. Details of the settlement include $1.5 billion for those deprived of clean drinking water, the creation of a First Nations advisory committee on safe drinking water, and at least $6 billion to support reliable access to safe drinking water. But community members who shared their outlook on the decades-old issue say they've lost hope in the federal government and don't agree with the court's settlement ruling.
I'm only entitled for 4 years plus 2 years, 6 years max. That is BS.
That's what's, I think, good news about the settlement is that it's not just about individual compensation, which I agree will never make up for ongoing harms in people's lives, but is an acknowledgement of that harm.
Eligible members can visit firstnationsdrinkingwater.ca to apply for compensation.
Turning to COVID-19 now, the number of infected patients at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Centre has fallen back into the teens. It's the 5th straight day of declining case counts in the hospital. There are now 19 COVID patients being treated. 4 of them are in the ICU. That number is unchanged from yesterday. The hospital's overall occupancy rate is more than 104%, while intensive care is nearly 82% full. The Thunder Bay District Health Unit is reporting another COVID-19 outbreak in the long-term care, this time at Pioneer Ridge in Plaza 4.
Municipal representatives from across the Northwest are gathered in Fort Francis for the 2022 Northwestern Ontario Municipal Association Conference. It marks the first time in 3 years that many mayors, councillors, and others have been able to gather in person. Adam Riley has the details from days 1 and 2 of the conference.
It took some time, but members of the Northwestern Ontario Municipal Association are meeting in person, discussing the issues that affect the communities they represent and the region as a whole. And while policy was top of mind, actually seeing each other in person was definitely a talking point.
It's nice to be together, and we have our own local issues in the Northwest, and we're able to share them together in person for a change. It's fantastic.
Being together face to face and building those relationships again outside of MS Teams or Zoom is really important.
There's just energy, there's excitement, and you just accomplish so much more when you're together, as opposed to, I think the novelty of the Zoom meeting wore off about 18 months ago, to be quite honest.
2022 is a special year for the conference as it falls right before a provincial election. In years previous, this has often led to in-person visits by the leaders of some of the parties. However, this year, none physically showed, and instead sent recorded messages, which left many, including NWOMA President Wendy Landry, underwhelmed.
That's a bit disappointing from a Northwest perspective. We like it when the leaders come to the corners of our part of the province to remind them where we are, to remind them that the issues are different. But I mean, you know, they attended virtually, they brought their messages virtually, but I assure you that NWOMA's at the table with all of these leaders and making sure they've heard our concerns.
A highlight of day one was the keynote address on truth and reconciliation from motivational speaker Stan Wesley, which managed to get attendees up on their feet and moving around, something not often seen at conferences like this. Landry says it's a topic that hits home for her and something that many municipalities within NWOMA are each working to address.
As a First Nations woman, that's something that's important to me as well. So knowing our truth, Stan Wesley talked today about knowing the truth and knowing those stories of our Auntie Ednas and how we can relate to all of us having an auntie who has a story in the history of the Northwest, especially. So I think that you know, the message today was welcoming and fun at the same time.
But this fellow was interesting because I think I saw his first presentation a few years ago, but this one kind of really brought it home, and he made it kind of interesting.
Day two had attendees sitting in on seminars on issues and projects that affect communities in the region, including transportation of nuclear waste, forestry, climate change, and tourism. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Nipissing OPP has charged a Calgary man who is allegedly driving his car more than double the speed limit. The 2019 Hyundai Elantra was clocked doing 190 kilometers an hour on Highway 1117, just west of Nipissing last night. The 25-year-old driver has been charged with stunt driving. His license has been suspended for 30 days and his car impounded for 14 days. His next court date is scheduled for June in Nipissing.
This year's Ribfest will look a lot more like it did pre-pandemic. The popular event normally draws more than 20,000 people and is a major fundraiser for Our Kids Count. Last year's Ribfest was held at Lakehead University using a drive-through format because of COVID-19, of course. And while it was successful, it didn't have the same feel as the Ribfests of the past. This summer, the event will be back at the CLE grounds and see the return of walk-up rib sales, a Sleeping Giant Brewery beer tent, and some great local music. The two out-of-town ribbers from last year will be back, Dinosaur Smokehouse and Ribs Royale. They'll be joined again by local restaurant Daytona's. Owner John Collins says he and his staff are excited to be a part of Ribfest again, especially in its traditional format.
For us, it's that personal contact. It's a little different. You don't have to talk to them through a car window, and you can service, but it'll still be busy for us, so we don't get to enjoy it as much as everybody else, but we look forward to it.
The biggest thing about Ribfest is the community that it promotes, and because that's what Our Kids Count is here for, to help our community, to help the families that need it, and Ribfest just represents bringing everyone together.
Ribfest 2022 will run August 25th to the 28th. Organizers hope to raise about $60,000.
A very special guest made a virtual appearance at Perro's Women Leaders Conference today. Famed primatologist Jane Goodall was a keynote speaker at the online event, which was focused on sustainability in business for women entrepreneurs. Goodall is most famous for her work living with chimpanzees in Tanzania. The 88-year-old responded to questions submitted by attendees, talked about her work in conservation, and the importance of having women and Indigenous people in environmental leadership. She also shared stories from her remarkable past.
Where everybody laughed and said, "You'll never get to Africa. It's far away. You don't have money. World War II is raging. And you're just a girl. Girls don't do that sort of thing." But my mother, on the other hand, she said, "Jane, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And then if you don't give up, you'll probably find a way." And I think that
Goodall's overall message was that everyone has an impact on the climate every day. She urged attendees to consider their impact and to take both individual and collective action to protect the environment.
Organizers of the annual Hike for Hospice hope to return to near normal this year with a large-scale event next month. Over the last 2 years, Hospice Northwest held the event semi-virtually, with participants walking their own route rather than around Boulevard Lake. The goal is to have upwards of 300 people this time, similar to pre-pandemic years. The starting point will be at Current River Park, fit with food trucks, vendors, and entertainment. Today's launch event was held at the Monarch Butterfly Garden. That's a special place for hospice and a fitting location. This year's hike is being held in honor of Dan Fulton, a founder of the garden, who passed away just last year. Executive Director Cherie Koch says the grieving process is easier when surrounded by hundreds of supporters.
We are so excited to get back together and see people. The human connection is so important, and especially when you're grieving the loss of a loved one, it's really important to be together with people and feel not so isolated. So we're really excited that our Hike for Hospice 2022 will be a hybrid model.
The Hike for Hospice is set for Sunday, May 29th at 11 a.m. Hospice Northwest hopes to raise $55,000 and has already raised more than half of that in advance of the organization's biggest fundraiser of the year.
A local nature photographer was able to capture a rare sight on video. The footage of 3 otters has attracted a lot of attention online, from people wishing they could have seen them firsthand. Kurt Black has the story.
In all his years of photography, Chris Artist has captured countless critters in nature. But never has he enjoyed an afternoon like he did last week, when he was able to get up close and personal with a group of otters as they played and fished by the river's edge.
You very rarely, they don't usually seem to stick around. But when they do, they pop up. They're a little curious. They want to know what's going on. And just the other day, I spent an hour and a half with 3 of them, which has never happened.
And Artist's passion for the outdoors is clearly shared by many in the community, as his Facebook page has been flooded with visitors wanting to get just a glimpse of the adorable little creatures.
Yeah, it's been overwhelming. I can't even keep up with the comments and the mentions and the people sharing them. And I made a little post that I've utterly lost all control of my otter pic.
And while Artist won't always be as fortunate as he was last week, his deep appreciation for the natural beauty that surrounds us will never fade.
Just to have this at our doorstep, and drive 10 minutes out of town and you can be somewhere where you won't see someone for hours, or, go down a little hiking trail and, come upon such nature. I think it's very special. People take it for granted so much.
Be sure to visit the Chris Artist Photography Facebook page to keep up to date with his latest adventures. Kurt Black, TBT News.
But he took care of the otter pun.